I think what I hear from our alumni is their capacity to really do a critical analysis of what's going on out there. And so when we're thinking about, for example, the concept of let's take education for a moment. There's been a lot of conversations about the achievement gap, right? And just by virtue of framing it as an achievement gap, it really reflects an analysis of personal responsibility, because what that frame talks about and focuses on is the lack of achievement by these students, many of them students of color, immigrant, and indigenous students. Now, what our organizers understand is that this is an example of institutional and structural racism, because the reality is that for the last 10 years, before our present governor, we had a governor who every year would strip the education part of the budget at the state level and do some kind of accounting mechanism where I wish I could do this, with my creditors. We owe you, but we're not going to pay you until we got it a year from now. So that means the school districts in Minnesota had to resort to levies, property tax increases, new teacher layoffs, and most of those new teachers were from communities of color and immigrant communities. The governor before this one we have today dismantled our quality education system because he's part of this political ideology that government should not be funding education. I guess they call it the Tea Party methodology. So our governor economically stripped our schools. And what we call it, when we talk about these gaps, we call them equity gaps. They're not achievement gaps. They're equity gaps that were fostered by a political agenda that comes out of not Minnesota, but from other parts of the country outside of Minnesota. Some use names like the Koch brothers and this organization called ALEC, the Alliance for Legislative Exchange Coalition, which of course advises legislators on how to shrink government and expenditures of government so that it can be drowned in a bathtub. That's a phrase I've heard. Because their feeling is the role of government is national security and public safety. So they are probably one of the reasons that Congress cannot agree on an immigration reform bill today, because these people, these Tea Party people, believe that the wall between Mexico and this country should be barbed wired and electrified fences and drones and helicopters, and let's put 400,000 more National Guard at the border to make sure that Mr. and Mrs. Contreras with their 3 children don't jump the fence, to get a job at McDonald's. That's the backdrop of what's going on today. And so we have these conversations, these political conversations in the training sessions. And we have curriculum that supports what we're trying to point out, is that our work, if we're talking about advancing racial, cultural, and economic equity, rests with changing the practices and policies of institutions, not people. That's another part of the racial justice work. They call that the healing work, and there's a lot of good examples of that racial and cultural healing work that's going on out there. Our work is really about politics. It's really about equity, policies, and practices.